From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
New York Mayor Eric Adams sounds off on his city's migrant crisis as Texas undertakes an impeachment trial of State Attorney General Ken Paxton. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Alicia Finley and editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua. New York Mayor Eric Adams was at a town hall on the Upper West Side of Manhattan this week when he went into a rant, more or less, on the city's migrant crisis, including saying that he sees no end to the problem. Listen to this.
This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City. We're getting 10,000 migrants a month. One time we were just getting Venezuela. Now we're getting Ecuador. Now we're getting Russian-speaking coming through Mexico. Now we're getting Western Africa. Now we're getting people from all over the globe have made their minds up that they're going to come through the southern part of the border and come into New York City. And everyone is saying it's New York City's problem. Every community in this city is going to be impacted.
Alicia, what do you make of this? Another sanctuary city mugged by reality? Chicago has been another one where they've been saying, we don't have any more room. And the irony has been large there, given previous statements by the leaders of that city.
Right. And I think there's also a certain irony when you say that they don't have any more room. Well, actually, there are fewer migrants coming into the city and the state than are actually people who are leaving. At least that was true for the last year and the previous year, where the city lost about 500,000 people, and it's continuing to lose people, and they're just higher earners and people who work more at blue or white collar jobs, lawyers and such. And now you're having the migrants come in, and they, for the first 5 or so months, they can't apply for even a work authorization. So they really are on the government dole. However, during the Trump administration, as you may recall, New York City particularly held itself out to be a sanctuary city and kind of went to war with the Trump administration when it tried to withhold funding for cities that declared themselves sanctuary cities. Same thing with Chicago, and there were actually some lawsuits regarding that. And again, the funding wasn't like complete funding. It was just a very narrow grant program for law enforcement. And so it's kind of ironic that Adams is now saying, oh, no, please don't come here. We don't have room for you. We can't take care of you. But word is spreading that will actually been providing pretty good accommodations for most of the migrants who've been coming, that they've been putting them up in hotels, pretty nice hotels, providing them good food. I mean, I think the estimate that I saw is that the city's paying about $256 a night just to shelter the migrant families. And then all in, you're looking at well over $300, maybe $400 a night. I did this calculation, back in the envelope calculation, when I was writing a column on the subject a few weeks ago, that a New Yorker would have to make around $280,000 a year before taxes to afford what the city's spending on each migrant family. So the city and Adams say, oh, don't come here. We don't want you, or we don't have space for you. But they're hearing probably from other friends or family members who have gone up to New York and have been actually treated quite well, at least in recent months. I mean, now you've seen stories about them camping out in front of the Roosevelt Hotel because the hotels are basically full and the shelters are filling up. But nonetheless, because New York City has a right to shelter, it's going to have to find some kind of accommodation. And you have to recall that whatever the city is going to be providing them is still going to be better than probably what they were experiencing in their home countries.
I give Mayor Adams credit for speaking straightforwardly about this as a problem. He says that the number of migrants that have come to New York is up to 110,000, and it has contributed to a budget hole of about $12 billion that he's saying will require painful cuts in other places in order to close. But Monet, I don't give him credit for the way that he framed it. Here's what he said. We've turned the city around in 20 months, and then what happened started with a madman down in Texas, decided he wanted to bus people up to New York City. And so, Monet, he's putting the blame on Texas Governor Greg Abbott. But Texas Governor Greg Abbott said earlier this week that Texas has bused about 13,000 migrants to New York City. And remember, that compares with a total that Eric Adams is citing of 110,000. So most of these people are not coming on buses sent by Texas. They're coming other ways. And it's not hard to imagine why migrants would be attracted to a big city with opportunity like New York.
Exactly. I think that Eric Adams, as a Democrat, wants to point the finger at President Biden to a very limited degree because he wants to get federal funding to be able to use to shelter the number of migrants who are coming into New York City. But ultimately, he's doing the politically convenient thing by saying that Greg Abbott and the state of Texas bear most of the responsibility for the crisis, when, as you point out, that's really not the case. The Department of Homeland Security has been moving migrants from the southern border because they refuse to detain them. The Biden administration has made it a policy to detain as few migrants as possible. They have not added additional funding for detention centers to be able to hold families together or even single adults. They're not holding nearly as many as the Trump administration did. Their policy is generally to allow asylum seekers into the country once they've passed a credible fear screening test. And so being unable to make room for them at the border, that means that a certain amount of them have to be sent to other parts of the country. And so they are directly doing that. And there probably are many migrants who are arriving in New York by other means, by private means, because, as Alicia mentioned, New York has this provisional right to shelter, quote unquote, and because they're providing pretty good services in terms of the accommodations, in terms of the food and other services for these migrants. And so it's going to be an appealing destination as long as thousands of migrants are able to enter this country and be allowed to stay by the federal government. I think the great irony is that in the same way the Biden administration is holding such a low threshold for credible fear and allowing thousands of asylum seekers to enter this country, despite the fact that they aren't necessarily fleeing political persecution in their home countries, New York also does not really have a textual right to shelter in the way that Eric Adams and other Democrats interpret it. It's really the result of a consent decree from the 1980s where Mayor Ed Koch essentially decided that they were going to create this policy and honor it of initially providing shelter to people who were in some kind of physical or mental distress. But over the years, as the Democratic Party has moved left, it's essentially grown to encompass anyone who demands shelter for any reason. And so New York theoretically could get itself out of this problem by redefining who has a right to shelter in the city to exclude economic migrants. But that's something that would be very unpopular with the progressive left and something that Eric Adams probably sees as off the table. And so he's not going to pay the political cost of changing that policy in a way that would actually lead to fewer migrants coming to New York City in the first place.
He has pushed for work authorization to be expedited. He has called for that. And Alicia, what's the story there? My understanding of how this works is that when someone crosses the border and then claims asylum, that asylum claim is adjudicated, but it takes a while. They're allowed to stay in the country while that's going through the process. And then they can apply for work authorization after that, but they're not allowed to even apply to work until 150 days after their asylum claim has been filed. And I guess my understanding is that the point of this was initially it was thought that this would discourage migrants from coming and claiming asylum in order to work. On the other hand, now we have 110,000 people that have hit New York. And because of these rules, they are not allowed to get a job. And so they really do end up on the public fisc.
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts on that. For one, I mean, the administration is now saying that, well, Congress needs to change the law. And that's true, though the administration has bent a number of laws when it probably shouldn't have. It has rewritten some immigration laws. So the fact that they're saying that, oh, well, we can't do anything about this, it's up to Congress. Well, I just don't think that passed the smell test, to be honest. What it has also done is allowed migrants from Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela to apply for work authorizations from their home countries before coming to the U.S. And that was actually intended as an incentive for them to not come here illegally and then just cross the border and then claim asylum. And then there's like, oh, what do we do with these folks? What the administration may be trying to do is to encourage these people to actually apply in their home countries for the work permits and not come here. Because all of a sudden, if you start providing the work permits initially, they may be worried that there could be a flood of more migrants coming to the border, because most of them, recall, they're actually coming here to work and for a better life. They're not coming here to be on the government dole. And so the draw for them is the work permits. The second point I would make is that I'm not so sure that even if a lot of these migrants got work permits in New York, that they'd be able to get jobs. The labor market in New York City is much softer than it is in most other places of the country. I think the unemployment rate, last time I checked, was about 5.4%, which is about 50% higher than the national average. And a lot of this is a result of the extended lockdowns and the fleeing and a lot of the office workers not coming back to the office. And so there actually isn't as much demand for this kind of lower level or unskilled labor in New York as there are in many other places, certainly Miami, Texas, even along the border. So I think that New York would still have a lot of problems. I mean, some of these folks, if they couldn't find jobs, maybe they would eventually migrate to other places of the country where they would find jobs. And that has been traditionally the case with immigrants, is that they go to where the jobs are. But for this period in which they don't have jobs right now or can't work, New York, again, it's a pretty good place to be.
But why do you think, Alicia, Mayor Adams won't stand up to those Democrats? I think there would be an opportunity for him to fill a void. Border security is the duty and the responsibility of the executive branch led by President Biden. Congress could change some of these laws, could overhaul the asylum system, but there's a logjam there, and Republicans are part of that logjam, but so are progressive Democrats, who don't seem interested in blocking any person from claiming asylum for any reason. And so it seems to me that there is an opportunity for some Democrat to step forward and say, listen, we have, as Mayor Adams says, we have Russian speakers that are coming across the southern border and claiming asylum, and this is a security problem. It's an issue. We have to deal with it. We have to get tough on this and sort of fill a void. Remember, Eric Adams was not the leftmost candidate in that mayoral race. He won by being kind of the centrist alternative. And so, Alicia, I'm a little bit perplexed why he seems so unwilling to do that. And he wouldn't have to do that at a town hall on the Upper West Side. He could find a little more politically mixed forum to make that argument in.
What's interesting is it's possible that he's worried about his base, shoring up the progressive base. He did not win election by a landslide. It was a contentious primary, and he did have some electoral difficulties. So he may be worried about his Democratic base by doing that. But obviously the reason why he's making the migrant issue is he's also worried about his base, that there are a lot of affluent, higher income people, Democrats, liberals, who, voted for him because he promised to turn around the city and to stop the wealthy from leaving. And so a lot of those types of people have actually been really disgusted by what's going on with the migrant crisis, especially with the Roosevelt Hotel, and they aren't seeing improvements. Now, why isn't he going up and, shouting from the rooftops that, we need these kinds of fixes that you mentioned, and Monet mentioned earlier, fixing the credible fear test? It's possible that he's just not very well informed about migrant or asylum policy. It's possible that perhaps he has national ambitions and, again, doesn't want to take off his base. But I think the fundamental problem is he just probably doesn't have the courage to actually stand up on this issue, again, when he would have to take some knocks from the progressives, when he's already taking knocks on other things like policing and such. And so he doesn't want to expend the political capital to do it.